Oh. It's artificial.
Straight caffeine.
Sugar.
Octane. Good evening and welcome to the City Council Finance Committee meeting on Thursday, November 16th, 2023. We have three items on our agenda. The first of these is discussion regarding the preliminary FYE 2023 City of Norman audit. Is that you or Clint?
I'm going to introduce Clint Mercer, our chief accountant, and he's going to introduce some individuals from Forvis. Again, where we are in the audit process, this is for the fiscal year that ended June 30th of 2023. The auditors have been examining our closed books for the fiscal year that ended June 30th. They're just about complete with their field work, about to have the unbound document ready for the bound document to go to council at your December 12th meeting. So that's where we are in the process.
This is Joel Hosser, partner at Forvis. This is Kirsty Morrison.
Yep. Yeah. Thanks, guys. We're just here. Actually, it's funny.
Months ago.
Yeah, we're just here a couple months ago, and like Mr. City Manager said, this is the easiest of the meetings because at this point we really got nothing to report, which is about the best we can even offer at this stage. But yeah, no. So at this point, we've reviewed the draft. We don't have any significant findings or anything like that to discuss, which is what we usually do at these meetings. So clean, unmodified opinions are expected, and really we have no significant deficiencies or material weaknesses that we would be required to report to you. Staff have been great to work with, as usual. Kirsty actually does most of the day-to-day work, so I just get to come in and kind of steal her thunder of doing all of the work. So, yeah, Kirsty, is there anything you want to add to that?
No, it's been a clean audit year.
Good. A couple things that we wanted to follow up on. So I know at the meeting a couple months ago, we talked about the public-private partnerships, and the library had come up, reviewed the agreements with Clint and his team, and because there's no what I would call significant consideration given, so a lot of times what triggers the accounting for a public-private partnership is there's a large exchange of money, either at the beginning or the end of it. With the libraries, there's not. It's more of a lease type arrangement, which actually one of them I think is accounted for under the GASB 87 lease standards as a lease. So don't see an issue there. And we're talking about, that was one of the implementation requirements. It doesn't look like the city has any at this time. And then another one is what's called GASB 96, which is, we call them SPIDAs, but essentially think of the IT technology arrangement. So a lot of entities are moving their systems to the cloud. So there's some guidance on how that gets recorded. Essentially, those, because they're so unusual from the standpoint of it's intangible to begin with, there's what are you actually purchasing? Those get treated very similar to the leases. And really, the city has a few, but not what I would call material. So if you think about like the general ledger systems that the city runs, those are all housed on premise. They're not cloud-based, so it doesn't meet that definition. So you shouldn't see a lot of change in your financial statements is essentially what I'm kind of getting at with all these implementations. So I'll leave it to you guys. I wasn't going to go through. I know you've got copies of it. We can dig into anything you'd like to, but it's about 200 pages, and we don't have to necessarily go through it in detail.
Mine's a question because I'm thinking this was what we talked about last year in one of our audits about our enterprise funds, and the amount of money that we have available. I can't remember the term.
Okay.
Is
Yep.
that still a concern? You know what I'm talking about.
Yes. Yeah.
We were very
ratios.
concerned last year with the fund balance situation in the water fund in particular, which is one of the enterprise funds.
Yeah.
We're very concerned about that deteriorating fund balance. Council did, acting as the trustees of the utility authority, put on the ballot for the voters a water rate increase that did pass. So we hope that over the next year, 2, 3, that fund balance position will start to stabilize, and that is certainly reflected here. But remember that a large part of that water rate increase was for capital projects. So those capital projects will be ongoing, but what we will be monitoring is the fund balance situation.
What is the percentage that we have to have?
8% in total, and it's split out between operating and capital reserves, and then reserves for outstanding bonds, but that's kind of a separate part.
I remember Chris talking about wastewater being the
I think she's
next.
talking about debt to income
Yeah.
coverage, that ratio was at 25.
125%.
125.
Yeah, we were
Yes.
getting very close to that, that's correct.
Right,
So now this
that's
will
what,
bump us
thank
up.
you. I could not think of the
Right.
word. You were thinking wastewater was gonna be the next one that was in
It's not doing
trouble?
well, yes.
Okay, but we're still okay with that.
April, we're for a
Okay.
vote for April, and we're monitoring.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no, very good question. Because of we're watching it, but because of the passes and all the ordinances and everything, we're less worried about it. We'll keep monitoring that though.
Thank you.
Councilmember Holmes?
Just for the record, Chris, when was the last wastewater rate increase? Yeah, more than 10 years, if I recall. Okay, so the, where I was looking at, I'll pull it back up. Okay, so the 24% of total general fund expenditures being unassigned, is that for the,
Yeah, now remember that is on an accrual basis, but that's a healthy position to be in. And that's kind of, I don't think that's changed very much over the last 2 years.
No, it hasn't.
and that doesn't mean we have a $22 million
No,
balance.
again, when I say accrual basis, that
Yeah.
means we budget on a cash basis, which means that we budget for revenues when they come in, we budget for expenditures when they're obligated for. On an accrual basis, you can accrue revenues that are reasonably expected to come in basically over the next couple of months, and so we book those here. And so you start to see the next 2 months, basically of sales tax in particular, getting reflected on the balance sheet. But again, we don't budget for that because the money has not actually come in yet.
Okay, and then the debt increased by 14.7 million, or 6%, but is due to, well, it says key factors being general obligation bonds, so voter approved projects that we're doing.
Yeah, that's basically the street bonds.
Okay. I would just encourage anybody watching that, as we talked about before the meeting, this is 130 pages, so if you're interested in knowing more about our situation financially, take a look.
In detail.
Yeah.
Light reading.
Also,
Absolutely.
Daryl, is Shakira here?
She is on board. She is currently being officed at the NIC while remodels are taking place in the building next door. So we think February she'll be over in this part of.
Do we need to ask her to come to this meeting, or could you, or what?
Absolutely,
Maybe we all need to just meet her in person. At some point, I think. that'd be good.
absolutely.
Pity she has to go over there first, but life's not always fair. Councilmember Montoya?
Am I up?
Yep,
Okay.
you're up. You're on.
So just out of curiosity, I wasn't here, I was out of town. Unfortunately, I couldn't meet you guys, but, so what was the planning materiality?
We don't disclose the planning materiality numbers
Okay.
specifically. It's consistent with, actually, management doesn't know those either. That's part of we don't announce that because we don't want things to go below that amount.
Yeah, I follow you.
Specifically, but yeah.
Former auditor, just curious.
Absolutely, yes. And privately, we can probably give you some of that information if you'd like, but yeah, we don't typically make it public.
Yeah. I'm a certified public accountant, former
Okay.
auditor at Grant Thornton.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah.
Well, nice to meet you. Yeah, sorry we haven't met before, but yes,
know.
absolutely.
Yeah, just say Councilmember Montoya just took office in July.
Oh,
and
okay.
It's been a couple
Well,
years since we had an
congratulations, yeah.
accountant, someone with a extensive finance background on council. So
Absolutely,
it is
okay.
nice to have someone.
Good deal. Oh, yeah, any questions or anything?
I'll reach out.
Okay. Yeah,
Anything else from council? Thank you, sir. And ma'am.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Just remember that under Sarbanes-Oxley law, we have to have an audit committee, and so the city council finance committee acts as the city's audit committee as well, so.
Okay. Item number 2, discussion regarding the release of Center City tax increment finance funds for infrastructure improvements in the Center City area.
This will be just kind of an open discussion for council, and I think, yeah, Sean is here. We have a Center City TIF fund that has been generating revenues. We have about $1 million fund balance in that fund right now. The projects that are identified for the Center City TIF were identified in the, what's known as the Johnson study. I know that I'm probably misstating what the actual title is. But they're basically for infrastructure projects to support development in the Center City area. My understanding of why this was put on the agenda is that either there are some projects that are wanted to be done. I don't know if they're related to a development, but what's been talked to me about are some alleyway projects. I don't know if that's to support any specific development, but again, it's just an open discussion. If you all wanted to give direction for some projects you wanted brought forward, we can certainly do
And
that.
there was a project at one time that we were talking about. What's the north-south street, Sean? Front Street still? Or
James Garner.
James Garner.
Right.
And so there were some drainage problems that were happening with that. And we were hoping at some time to be able to repave, redirect water, do something. And I remember talking about it, but it's been a while.
Yeah, and now that project, the James Garner, what we call Phase 3, is already, these guys are ready to bid that project as early as next month. So I think we'll be taking care of that through the bond project and wouldn't need to use these funds.
What would you want to use these funds for?
What Anthony's referring to is mostly alleys. We're getting requests from areas where what we call the mini dorms are going up and lots of traffic and lots of issues in there. And these development projects aren't required to improve the alleys. So we've got lots of additional traffic and stormwater issues in the alleys. Many of these are unpaved or partially paved. So that's the feedback we're getting mostly from the residents in the district is, when are you gonna improve our alley? And there is no funding available for that right now. So that would be probably the top priority. Anthony mentioned that we've got this full list of infrastructure projects in 42 different blocks. So lots of water and sewer improvements, stormwater improvements that are listed in there. We haven't prioritized those, but we haven't done that because the funding really hasn't been available. So that's really the question. Are we ready to start to prioritize some of these projects based upon that Johnson and Associates study?
And have we spoken to the county, since they have some kind of part in the Center City TIF, don't they?
I'm aware of.
Oh, okay.
Just it being a property tax too.
Just being property tax, okay. I just want to make sure everybody got accounted for. What's your pleasure?
I was wondering if we had an update on the, when we could see the urban design and implementation plan.
It'll be on your agenda on the 28th.
Okay.
So that's a project for the others that don't know, in a previous council committee, there's a $100,000 budget for an update of that Johnson Associates plan. We sort of grew it a little bit into more of an urban design implementation program. That number came in at 216-ish. So we're gonna need to tap into this account at your pleasure on the 28th if you want to approve that contract. And that's really as I understand it, an attempt to do some of this, to prioritize some of these improvements, but also to really envision streetscape improvements, landscaping improvements, parking, the whole vision of the original infrastructure plan, which would dovetail nicely into this discussion, is that once they get that done, you're gonna want funding to start to do some of those improvements.
So if we see that contract on the 28th, how long until that is complete, when we get that back?
I'm gonna say 6 months was the term on that
Okay.
project, so you'll start to see those concepts and probably as early as April.
And it will have a phasing of, like a recommended phasing on how to put these projects into motion, the upgrades and all of that kind of
It
stuff.
will, as well as a cost estimate, an updated cost estimate
Right.
as well. So
Oh, wow.
that's driving some of this request along with the other alley, you know.
Okay, how much is in the fund balance right now?
I don't have that exact number, and I should have brought it, but I'm not far off when I say $1 million. It's right around here.
No, I thought it was more than that.
It was
I
around
was 2 million.
Yeah, that's what I remember.
That's what I remember.
I can go grab the,
Okay. So do we have any specific requests that have come through, like for specific alleys or specific places?
We
Like,
do.
do we have a list of that?
I can
I mean,
put that
like,
together.
I think it's hard, to have a discussion about what to move forward without the the updated design and implementation plan, and then also without seeing what the list is and kind of what the cost estimates might be.
We can put that together for you. I might
just-
mention that kind of just procedurally, this is our third TIF, and there's obviously a fourth one under discussion. This is a part of your budget process, so you will, as we enter into the 25 budget, you've got an account, and then if, at your direction, staff then starts to put together, okay, these are the things we recommend for FY 25. That's kind of what I think we're asking
Yeah.
for your direction. And yes, the urban design plan will be a big part of that contributor, and you'll be discussing that while you're discussing the 25 budget.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think it's a discussion that we've been asking to kind of have, but I guess today I understand that there are things that are coming forward, but like, I don't know that I can say I can direct funds be moved forward to start, these projects without actually seeing a list of the projects and
Sure.
really understanding the
That's our full
scoping.
intent. We wouldn't bring that,
of everything.
none of that money would be spent without council
Yeah.
approval. So we're just looking for that direction. Are you ready to start to plan and implement some of these based upon, either the urban plan or requests from the developers and others? The way the TIFs work is usually it's kind of project-based, where there's a block of Center City that gets done, and we have to participate with street and parking improvements. Well, that's not happening, and as you know, Center City is not happening a block at a time, it's happening a parcel at a time.
Yeah.
And that's a challenge when you're trying to figure out, you can't do infrastructure a parcel at a time. You have to do the whole block. And so that's kind of where we think we're heading. We need some direction to know, should we start planning on that basis?
And I think having that list of kind of like where the projects are that we're starting to see,
Sure.
then we can kind of start thinking about, okay, we do the infrastructure in that area because we've got, more developments coming forward. Or I know that we've also talked in the past too about, projects that have already been completed that, didn't see the infrastructure stuff on the front end. Maybe circling back because they're the ones that are generating the increment right now.
Exactly.
And so how do we repay kind of like that investment to make the stuff there? So like, I guess I want to see all of those things,
Sure.
to start having like the broader
Happy
kind of
with that.
discussion. Yeah.
I should have mentioned too, one of the other things that's happening is that you're familiar with the inset parking on a major street. The developers are liking that. But again, if it's one little parcel,
Right.
if it's one space, and we're going, no, we should do the whole block, and let's do the whole
Yeah.
thing. So that's the kind of thing that we're saying. So we're happy to.
Was that
provide
kind
you
of like
list.
on McCullough? Was one of the ones that we did?
Yeah, McCullough was one of the ones, and that ended
Yeah.
up being a bond project that we were able to do through another means.
Yeah.
But that's really what's driving some of this. It's coming in incrementally with each project or two or three. And we're trying to think about infrastructure on a larger scale. That's just very realistic.
Okay, well, in that case, support seeing that extra funding coming to us on 11/28 then? That's
Right.
what we need for the design implementation
Yeah,
plan.
that's a contract with Johnson.
Which when I hear about these requests and wanting to redo a street, I'm just like, design implementation plan. That's pretty much what that's about. So I guess it sounds like these requests that you're hearing will help feed that process.
That and your budget.
Okay.
An alley is not going to be in that implementation plan, I don't think. Maybe it is, perhaps it is. But I think the implementation plan is actually, and it tends to focus on the main street, the front side of the developments, not the,
Is that
or the functional alleys or a sewer line or that sort of thing.
Is that in the contract for the design implementation plan, the alleys?
in the original study, I know that alleyways as a whole were an allowable project, but there was not any specific, this alleyway as opposed to that one.
I
You
mean,
did a lot of that in-house, right?
No, that was all done by Johnson
The
Associates.
surveys of
out
the-
house.
of the alleys?
Yeah, they did all
Oh,
of that
okay.
themselves. What we have done since is that we have done an alley study. We went out and looked at all the alleys and we did rank those. So we do have an alley
guess that's
ranking
what I was
already
talking about,
in-house.
yeah.
So that was done in-house. So we do have that information and that will be supplied to Johnson Associates so that they can incorporate that into the program.
Perfect.
So pavement management system ranks all of our streets, gives them a letter grade. And that's how you guys determine where we recommend council appropriate maintenance money. Are the alleys,
Very similar.
okay,
We basically kind of patterned it a lot off of what is in is it commercial or is it residential? Is it grass, concrete, asphalt, or gravel? And assign scores, so in the end, we do have a score for each alley. So it is based upon a score and a ranking, just like we do with our pavement system, or like we do with our sidewalk system or anything else, where we can actually kind of give this one is in more critical condition than this one, or needs attention first.
The difference being that most of our alleys are unpaved, and there's no plan to pave every alley. You don't have enough money to do that. So we're trying to prioritize. If you want to pave an alley, it's very expensive, but it ought to be based upon usage or demand or growth and development in that block. Not
Does that
just
area still have sanitation pickup in the alley, or it does?
Yes.
Okay, so
some,
that's
yes,
half.
many do.
That's half.
And that drives it to some degree. So a little different than pavement management. We do have a really good, as Scott says, good summary of the condition of the alleys. It's just a choice on when you want to put dollars into real improvement.
And my memory is that was sanitation picked up in the alleyway, was a ranking factor. How many driveways, how many people had access, to their property from that. So there was a lot of factors that we put in, and it wasn't just Center City though. That was the whole, all the alleys that we're aware of in the city. So we'll have to parcel out those ones in the alleys in Center City for this report, but that's all factors that we try to utilize.
I wouldn't, given how we have to deal with stormwater, are there environmentally friendly designs of alleys for water runoff? And also, I mean, some of the pain of having an unpaved alley is you get these potholes and it's uneven and the rock breaks down over time. So like what are you putting back if you're fixing one of these?
Most of what we do are concrete paving with an inverted crown to carry the water. We do have a recently adopted engineering design criteria that has low impact design options. Not many of those are really practical in alleys because we're carrying such heavy loads. These track trucks are monsters. So many of those permeable concrete and those kinds of things probably are not going to function under that kind of loading in most of the alleys. But we do have environmentally sensitive design options for all of our infrastructure where they fit, where they're applicable.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Holman?
Yeah. Seems most of the alleyways in the center city are paved. I can think of a couple that are not anymore, or are not yet. And I actually just drove down McCullough and made a little loop today. So that was a whole one project, doing McCullough and then the eastern little slip and then the new alleyway behind it.
Yes.
I mean, that's a pretty perfect example, I guess, of how the whole center city would be done, I think.
That's right.
I think you were about to say that we shouldn't just base it on the condition. Is that what you're gonna say? Like,
Yeah,
because it would seem logical that, well, whichever one's in the worst shape, go fix that one, right?
Right, I don't think you're gonna have that option. You're not gonna have enough funding to do that. So we kind of think it's gonna be driven by this implementation plan, but also driven by demand. If there's a real development project, you're gonna wanna have that funding available to go in and assist in the development agreement to do an alley or inset parking or whatever council chooses to do with that particular development. That's really the model that you followed in University of North Park, where there was a project, we put together a development plan, and we access those TIF funds to do the city's water line or the road or whatever your contribution to that development project was. That's what we think is going to happen. We hope happens in Center City, but again, it's happening very small scale. It's not happening like we hoped we hoped it would come in and block along really cool project. It's just.
I think we got one of those right now on McCullough that's half a block, I
Yeah.
guess, and that's
Yeah.
kind of an example of what the intent was not just parcel by parcel, but a big one like
Yeah,
that.
that's a big one. That's the first big one that we've seen.
Do you recall how much that project cost, the McCullough and the alleyway?
We used a couple of different funding sources for that. I'm gonna say the total project was in the 400,000 to 500,000 range-ish.
Okay. And there's nothing that would prevent us from using any other funds we don't have to just use TIF funds if we wanted to do other things that we didn't have TIF funding for, we could, right?
Yeah, you do have.
Just like you did with that, yeah.
Exactly, you do have an alley program, for instance, and that's part of what I think prompted this question. We'd like to use the alley dollars where in other areas outside of Center City, and we'd like to use the Center City TIF funds for the alleys, that sort of thing. Because there's plenty of alleys outside of Center City that we get requests for.
And the council, we could approve an increase in funding for that program. We could use general fund surplus. We could appropriate different capital funds if we wanted to do that. And then a project I'm definitely interested in, just overall, we've talked about a lot, is, well, I think two parts. The Center City TIF being for infrastructure improvements overall, but also not meant to be a direct incentive to someone necessarily to build something, but can we make an improvement to the surrounding property infrastructure-wise that would make it easier for you to develop there? And to me, the above-ground power lines is one of those that I would be interested in addressing throughout the area. I mean, we've had one example where it could have been an issue, or was, in the alleyway. And then we have some on Boyd Street too. And if there's a hindrance to someone doing something because of that, either they having to pay for it out of their pocket to bury it themselves, or it would seem an appropriate request for someone to ask of the Center City TIF would be, if these are buried, it makes this project more feasible, or I don't have to ask for a variance from the code if this power line's buried. So that's definitely one of the aspects I would like to see be eligible anyway, for sure.
Makes sense. That wasn't in your original plan.
Right,
So
yeah.
The original plan was just city infrastructure.
Yeah, I don't recall, any real contemplation about it, and I guess didn't think it would be something that might be in the way for whatever reason. And it also aesthetically doesn't look great when you have new stuff right there and looks nice, and then there's these old crooked power poles that are leaning over, and so I think it's just part of the total vision of the area too.
Can I ask Catherine if that would be considered a significant change to the project plan to add that sort of a project?
It could be, it depends on probably, I'd want to get a sense of how much money that is and how big of a portion of all the projects those are. Because the project then was very focused on public infrastructure, roads, alleys, water lines, things like that, so.
Yeah, I'd be, interested in exploring that more for sure.
Okay. Yep, I don't know who came up.
I just
Councilmember
would
Grant.
say that I don't know that I would want to go that route because it's OG&E's infrastructure. I would be fine if it was like lighting that the city owned or whatever, but I think that needs to be negotiation between OG&E and the developer. And if OG&E is not coming to the table with the developer, it's not the city of Norman that's preventing that development from happening. So I would prefer to keep it to the scope of public infrastructure.
It came in handy, if I'm remembering, the pole that you're talking about was right out there by Highland Dairy.
That one is one.
That was only one. That was the one that came to my mind.
This one, the one I was thinking of is in Center City on Apache.
Yeah, it was just a turn radius.
Yeah, no,
problem.
Sims and James Garner, that
Sims.
project. Because there's an alley that runs east, well, sort of east-west. Downtown doesn't run east-west, but sort of east-west, and then there's another one that runs north-south-ish in a weird way right there, like a T. There's two alleyways that intersect. So,
That happened.
Yeah, there's just between Eufaula and, yeah, the alleyway behind Apache, there's a north-south alleyway.
So we can blame it on Chris.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, my comments were also gonna be about, OG&E, and, I mean, I think that this is another opportunity for us to potentially partner with OG&E to, in my mind, do the right thing. And also to upgrade their infrastructure. This is an upgrade ultimately to their grid when they put things underground. And this is the conversation that we've been having for a number of years with them. And my concern with adding that kind of scope into this project is that it will blow the budget. Like, we know how expensive it is to bury lines. I understand that that's on, that's difficult for a developer to do. That's difficult for us. OG&E, that's the reason why they say that it can't bury lines. So I don't want to take too much money from all of the other important infrastructure upgrades that, are city-owned infrastructure and things to, potentially, like, yes, I want the power lines buried too, but I'm just concerned that it takes too much out of the TIF funding to do that. But I think there are opportunities for negotiations in other ways with OG&E.
I texted Kimberly to see if they had a report on our downtown alleys. There's some interesting transformers that are held on some interesting power poles that span our alleyways. And it scares me to death to watch our solid waste guys back there dumping overhead bins under very low power lines. So OG&E did go out and do some assessment of what their infrastructure would look like underground. And I know Chris has a bunch of infrastructure back there. So it would be an interesting exercise to determine where our infrastructure exists. And I mean, is there just plain enough real estate behind the buildings? One of the big old buildings was an old AT&T building on Main Street. I'm trying to remember which side of the street it's on. South side. And it had all kinds of crazy infrastructure back there to power the old hardware that used to be in that building. And I don't think there's a whole lot of switch left in it. But so I'll see if I get a response, if I can get a report of what their assessment was, what that downtown opportunity
I mean, they
would
still
be.
are trying to pass a franchise agreement, and I mean, I know that, it's gonna go back up on the ballot, but they haven't substantially changed anything about what happened or what they were proposing last year. And so, like, again, more opportunities for them to show good faith effort to upgrade infrastructure and things that, this community wants. And doing it before an election is probably a good idea to do it.
Would you be interested in exploring neighborhood improvement districts in this committee and sitting down, just like a BID, but it's the homeowners, not the business owners that do that? And there's a way, I'm talking out of school, that's a legal question, but there's a way to do that. And that would be, nothing wrong with working together with different pots of money.
I mean, I think there's no hurt in discussing it, but, right, like a bid, then the neighbors would have to come forward
They have
to,
Homeowners assessment.
yeah.
We'd have to
to
figure out
want-
the
To really want
size.
that, yeah.
It's an economy of scale. If it was just 3 houses, it won't work. If it's
Right.
just 1 block, it probably doesn't. And we'd have to know what that scale was. But I think it's an interesting discussion for people that might want to do that. Be another one of those things that blows up underneath you too. So, anyway, yes, sir.
Yeah, I agree about negotiating an agreement with OG&E to do it. My intent isn't that we would pay for burying the utility lines for the whole area. Just making it something that a developer could request, and especially because the TIF revenue is being generated by the development of those properties. So why shouldn't they be able to request help with, if it's a 50-50 agreement with OG&E, they're paying for 50 and the property owner has to pay for 50, could that property owner request TIF funds to cover that 50% with the increment that their property is paying to generate? I mean,
But what else are they, my question is, like, what else are they giving up if they want to use that money for burying the lines? Because there's other infrastructure in that same area, in that block, in that area for, you know, the stormwater upgrades, for, you know, the streetscaping, for all of that, like,
Yeah.
do they get to make the choice?
Yeah, they could say, well, I want the stormwater stuff, or actually I need this, or this, the stormwater part would make my development easier to do, or the power thing would make it easier to do, or the alleyway would make it easier to do.
Yeah, so my concern is
What would be the-
that's one property owner, and then they screw the rest of the block because we're using all of the funds in one area. So like, this is a conversation that I think is really important and worthwhile to have, but like, that is my concern, is that, you know, one person says, oh, and then you're like, well, we don't have any more money for that block to do those upgrades that, you know, are the streetscape or the stormwater or whatever. So I think like, we need to decide like, what is critical and what do we want to see happen
I think
in
that'd
that
be an
area.
excellent discussion.
Yeah.
And I would also say, what are we getting for that? Like maybe that if we're doing those public improvements, like the stormwater, all that stuff, are we getting like a little bit under market rate housing that's a part of this?
The requirement.
Yeah, I just don't want to give out the money like that. I would like to see it come back in ways that help the community.
Sure.
I also adopted a policy guide when this TIF was put in place that I'll email out to you all. That also talks about how applications for assistance need to happen. So that might be something to look at as well.
Thank you. Would your general guidance to Mr. O'Leary be that he proceed to get everything organized, do all the things he needs to do, and Anthony knows that we have $20 million? No.
2.7.
2.7.
You were wrong.
I heard
You were right, I was wrong. 2.75.
It's almost three.
Actually.
You know, it doesn't
Yeah.
seem like very long ago, we sat in here and the number was sitting at 400,000. So the assessor caught up on all that construction activity that we've all seen. It just took a while before it actually hit the tax rolls, so.
And that's
Nice to
always
see
the
it
case,
growing.
yeah.
All right,
Yes, to your question.
thank you. Item 3, discussion regarding monthly revenue and expenditure reports.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have a whole lot of general information. I did want to highlight one fund, though, which is the New Development Excise Tax Fund, which is, I believe it's page 134 in your handout, but it's in the monthly report by fund. And I just wanted basically to draw your attention to this fund, just to talk about how it works, and how revenues have come in. There's two different types of revenue that come into the excise tax fund. One is residential, one is commercial. But basically, whenever a permit is given to build, they have to pay a formula-based excise tax for those permits. And as you'll see here, we're right on target for the residential for this fiscal year, and about 41% above last fiscal year. So we've generated about $356,000 in residential excise tax this fiscal year, but only about $51,000 of commercial. Now, the commercial excise tax revenues are very volatile. There won't be some months that there's none, and then some months that there's one big permit, like the Sooner Station Apartments gets one permit that's $1 million, and all of a sudden it drives those commercial revenues. And we haven't had any of those. I probably should have invited somebody from planning to talk about if there are any on the horizon. But I would be hopeful that before the end of this fiscal year, we'll start to see some catch up on the commercial side. But again, the excise tax fund really is a proxy for the development community in Norman and kind of how we're doing. So again, we're about 10% below our budget as a whole, and that's reflected for the residential is right on target, but the commercial is behind. So we're looking for some commercial development to catch us up in that fund. And again, these revenues can only be used to expand and make improvements to the sewer system. And it was voted on and approved by the voters in 2001, and it's made some really good improvements over time. Other than that, I'll just respond to any questions that you may have related to the revenue and expenditure reports.
So as Anthony was gonna would have been helpful for Jane, but what council took action on Tuesday night, you approved 770 housing units. All gonna show up right here.
At some point.
At some point.
When you approve a plat, that's not an excise tax. The excise tax is driven by a permit.
Yep, when they come and
So if
start
there's
building.
700 plats, but, it might be 10 years before those are permitted, so.
Well, I think that number needs to come, eventually flatten out in houses to 875 houses per year to be able to catch up, which is a lot. And if those are, and because there's such a long tail, a 3-year tail basically to get those things done or more. That's quite the thing. Looks like sales tax is fine. Luckily. Any other questions from council? Yes, sir, I'm sorry.
Oh, you're fine. So the summary of major general fund expenditures versus budget, I notice most of the departments, it's negative, or it's less than the variance from projected to date. But I did notice that IT is at 27% above. And I know that they're building out stuff. Is that part of that?
That's the biggest part of that. Yeah, that's on the capital outlay side.
Yes, 83%.
I know that if you go
Right, so-
over to the IT service center room, you'll see floor to ceiling stacked up with new computers that are waiting to be programmed and installed.
Okay.
But they have bought them, so the money has been spent.
And just highlighting that, because IT, like we've talked about before, continues to be one of the, I think, as far as public safety, right up there with police and fire and public works in my mind. And that all three of those could be rendered, not helpless maybe, but could be impacted negatively if we don't have strong IT. So I just want us all to continue thinking about the importance of the IT department. I don't know if the public even thinks about it that much.
I have a feeling that will, and probably thankfully, there isn't recognition of how big that investment is in IT infrastructure. IT has just rolled out a dual identification process. If you're away from your computer for 15 minutes and it goes to sleep, when you go to log back in, now you're gonna get a text and you've got to respond from your cell phone back to the computer to say it's really me logging back in, just to make sure the system is as tight as possible. So they've rolled that out to about 50% of all of our users. And the focus on that IT security is every bit as vigilant as Chris's efforts to make sure our water quality and our wastewater are at levels that they're supposed to be at. And when we think about all of the potential impacts to Norman, we think about train derailments as a possibility. I think the likelihood of an assault on our IT infrastructure is greater than the likelihood of a train derailment in Norman.
Yeah, I read about all these governments getting, in trouble IT-wise, or getting hacked, getting held hostage, all sorts of stuff, paying out ransoms.
We all recently got dozens and dozens of emails from the city manager of Yukon, and she was requesting through OMAG or OML, hey, do you have a policy on X? Do you have an ordinance on X? And I'm thinking, Tammy's really busy this morning. Well, lo and behold, Yukon got hacked and Mustang got hacked, and we're not quite sure what the depth was, but somebody got into their email and started spamming out all kinds of interesting questions and requests for information back in. So it happens all around us.
Yeah.
Happened to me a month ago. Drove me bananas.
Yeah.
But it took forever to get, but luckily, it didn't get from one phone to the other. And that was, so there was no access. Tim didn't ever have any access in there.
And then the police department was the only other department that was above its projected expenditures to date. And the only category that's above in that is the salaries and benefits at 7.7%. What is that?
That's overtime.
Overtime is what I was thinking, but,
Gonna increase now?
700,000, well, 600,000 above. But yeah, that's what I was thinking it might be. Is the capital equipment budget, is the 2.3 million, is that like the vehicles that we approved and all
Yes.
that stuff?
That's a large part of it.
Okay, 22.6 million in salaries and benefits, just so everybody listening knows, that's how much we spend just on salaries and benefits for the police department. It's a lot, but it's expensive to have fire and police, 17.4 million for the fire department. So those are the ones I had about that. And then I noticed the sales tax comparison city by city, that Norman and Moore were having the hardest time, it looks like, on this one. That we were still tracking ahead of them more anyway, and that Oklahoma City was seemingly staying really stable at 2.8-ish for the last 3 months in a row. Any thoughts on
No clue.
any of that?
No clue. We just continue to monitor it. I have my little phone group of my peers in some of those cities. We talk about kind of what's going on, but the considered opinion is, I don't know.
That's 30 years of experience talking right there.
Well, yeah, I mean, like Lawton is, I think they're experiencing right now what we've experienced over the last 2 or 3 years. They were at 9.3%, way ahead of everybody else, double everybody else, which is fascinating.
It makes you wonder, did they have a new battalion assigned to Fort Sill? I mean, they're just
And
hard.
again, they were way down last year, so they're
Yeah.
comparing to a very low number.
That's
I'm
also,
actually gonna spend a day in Lawton sometime next week. Right after
Sorry.
Thanksgiving.
You have to look around. And one of our neighboring cities was at 8. Who just had a Michelin tire company?
Oh,
Ardmore.
Yeah.
It's like
You'll see
1,400
that
jobs.
when that payroll disappears, how it negatively impacts.
How many jobs?
the
was
Like
state,
1,400.
1,400.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it'll be
It's like their
interesting to
largest
watch and track
employer.
that with their sales tax revenue.
Yeah.
It's devastating.
So yeah, I just think it's always interesting every month to take a look at these and see if there is or isn't any kind of explanation or not for how it varies in different cities, but
And I will say, Councilmember Holman, I think I speak for my staff when I say how much we appreciate that you read those things. A lot of work goes into that, and just the public should know
Yeah.
that the information is out there. It's public information, and we will put this in whatever format that you want. But it's very valuable information if you'll take some time to just study it.
and I know it shows 4 months consecutive of a decrease, but again, as we keep pointing out, is we're still, for FY '24, like almost 2 million more than what our level was before 2020.
The bump.
So any decrease looks like a decrease when it's actually still way above what we normally had before.
Sure.
Yeah, so, comparing to historic highs, we've had a decrease, but it's still much higher than our average before. So I appreciate your staff putting this together every month for us and encourage all of our residents to, check this stuff out. It is public. I think we've won awards for being one of the most transparent
26.
governments in the in the state of Oklahoma. So thanks.
Anything else from council? Anything else from finance?
No, sir.
Now let's go home. This is adjourned.